In the first nights of our new home with my husband, my father broke into my house with a rope and a pacifier. He said, "Daddy came to get his little girl back." For 20 years, he treated me like a baby who would never grow up. Hi, my dear ones. Hello to all of you. It's so wonderful to have your company here with me today. Come on in, have a seat. Make yourselves comfortable because this grandma has a story to tell that still makes me tremble when I remember it. But first things first, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Laura Beatrice Thompson. I'm 78 years old, and I was born right here in Asheville, North Carolina, where I still live today. This is a beautiful mountain town, you know? In winter, we wake up to frost covering everything, and the smell of fresh coffee fills the houses early in the morning. I love this town, despite everything I went through here. These days, my dears, my life is nice and peaceful, thank God. Every morning I wake up early, around 6 o'clock, and the first thing I do is put the coffee pot on to make a nice hot cup. My George, who I was married to for 53 years, may God rest his soul, he passed away 5 years ago. He taught me how to make coffee just right with those good beans we buy at the local market. While I drink my coffee, I sit here on the front porch, wrapped in a wool shawl that my granddaughter Julia made for me, just watching the street come to life. Before I start my real story, I'd like to ask you something. If you can, please click that like button down there. Julia explained to me that this helps the video reach more people. And subscribe to Grandparents' Tales too, okay? Turn on the notification bell, because I'm going to share more stories here, stories that need to be told. And you, my dear ones watching me right now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with breakfast, after lunch, or in the evening? I always read all the comments. Julia helps me, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of love. Now, my children, settle in because the story I'm going to tell today is difficult. It's about my father, about a sick obsession that almost destroyed my life, and about the incredible man who saved me using only his intelligence. It's about the night my father broke into my house with a rope and a pacifier, determined to take me back to the past. But it's also about love, courage, and liberation. Take a deep breath with me because we're going back many years in time to the 1940s when I was just a girl growing up here in Asheville in a very different time from today. Part 1. Childhood in the Mountains. I was born in 1947 at the very end of winter when Asheville was still covered in frost. My mother, whose name was Madeline Thompson, everyone called her Maddie, always told me that on the day I was born, she looked out the window of the little room where she had me and saw the pine trees all covered with ice sparkling in the morning sun. She said it was a sign from God that I would be a strong girl, capable of withstanding life's cold. My father's name was Ernest Augustus Thompson. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, worked as a carpenter right here in Asheville. He had a small workshop on the street below where he made custom furniture, tables, chairs, wardrobes, those kinds of things. I remember the smell of fresh wood he'd bring home on his clothes every evening. I remember his big hands, always with wood splinters under his nails, calloused from so much work. My mother, Maddie, was a petite woman, delicate with that sweet way about her. She took care of the house, cooked like nobody else. She made pot roast that was wonderful and a pecan pie that melted in your mouth. She also sewed for others, took in clothes from other families to hem, sew buttons, mend tears. It was her extra money, which she kept in a cookie tin hidden in the cupboard. I had an older brother, Arnold, who was 7 years older than me. When I was little, Arnold was almost a young man, always running around the street with friends, playing marbles, flying kites. He didn't have much patience with me, thought little girls were a nuisance. But once in a while he'd take me along to play at the field near our house, and I'd be so proud to walk with my big brother. We lived in a simple wooden house near downtown Asheville. It was a small house, painted light blue. My father had painted it himself, with a little white gate in front and a small backyard. It had only 3 rooms: the living room, which was also the kitchen, my parents' bedroom, and a tiny little room where Arnold and I slept, him in a twin bed and me in a small bed against the wall on the other side. In winter, my dears, that house was freezing. We'd wake up and see our breath coming out like smoke. My mother would light the wood stove early, and we'd all huddle together there in the kitchen so we wouldn't freeze to death. She'd make strong black coffee, cut thick slices of homemade bread, and spread butter on them, and we'd eat right there, standing up near the stove, waiting for the sun to warm things up a bit. My father, Ernest, was always a man very dedicated to his family. He worked from sunup to sundown in his carpentry shop, came home tired, but always had a smile for my mother and a pat on the head for me. He called me my little princess, and when I was very small, he'd pick me up and sing those old songs, nursery rhymes, while I fell asleep on his shoulder. I remember he was very protective of me, more than he was with Arnold. If I fell and scraped my knee playing in the yard, he'd get upset, grab my mother complaining, "Maddie, aren't you watching the girl? She got hurt." My mother would laugh, say that children were meant to play and get hurt, that it was part of it. But my father didn't like it, worried too much. I spent my days playing in the yard or in the street with other girls from the neighborhood. We played with dolls. I had a rag doll that my mother had made, with button eyes and a little flowered dress. Played house, played cooking, made toy stoves from old cans and little clay pots. In summer, when it warmed up a bit, we'd go to the creek that ran nearby, dip our feet in the cold water, catch tadpoles in jelly jars. I had a little friend, Bernice, who lived 3 houses down. We were inseparable. Spent our afternoons at her house or she at mine, making up games, telling secrets. Her mother made wonderful sweet bread with that crispy crust on top, and whenever I went there, she'd give me a warm piece with butter melting on it. My childhood was happy, you know. At least up to a point it was. We were poor, but we didn't lack anything. Had food on the table, had clean clothes, had love. My mother was affectionate, my father hard-working, my brother, well, he was a big brother, kind of grumpy, but he liked me in his own way. But there was something I started to notice when I got older, around 9, 10 years old. My father didn't like it when I played with boys. If any little boy from the street came over to play hide-and-seek or marbles, my father would stand at the window, arms crossed, watching with that stern face. Once the son of Mr. Theodore, a skinny boy named Norman, came to call me to fly kites with the gang. My father came out to the gate and said very seriously, "She's not going. Girls don't fly kites with boys." I didn't understand, because Arnold flew kites with everyone and nobody said anything. My mother also thought it was strange. Once I heard her talking quietly with him in the kitchen at night when they thought I was asleep. She said, "Ernest, the girl needs to play with everyone. That's normal. You're being way too protective." And he replied with that deep voice of his, "Maddie, you don't understand. This girl is different. She's special. I'm not going to let the world ruin her." At the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. But today, looking back, I see there was already something there, something that wasn't normal, that was beginning to grow in my father's mind. When I turned 11, my father gave me a porcelain doll as a gift, one of those expensive ones, with eyes that closed when you laid it down. It was beautiful, all in a pink lace dress. But I was already becoming a young lady, didn't play with dolls much anymore. I felt embarrassed, but thanked him, gave him a kiss. He held my face between his big hands, looked right into my eyes and said, "You'll always be my little girl, Laura, always." At the time, that just seemed like a loving father talking. But it wasn't. It was a promise, or a sentence. The years went by, and I grew up. My body changed. I became a young lady. My mother started teaching me women's things, explained about that time of the month, started teaching me how to cook properly, to wash clothes, to iron. She'd say, "Laura, soon you'll be a young woman. You'll get married. You'll have your own home. You need to learn these things." But my father, My father seemed unwilling to see that I was growing up. He still treated me like I was a small child. Still called me little princess. Still wanted me to sit on his lap when we listened to the radio at night. I was already 12 years old, already getting embarrassed, but he insisted. I remember one specific day, shortly before I turned 13. I was in the backyard helping my mother hang laundry on the line. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we were talking, laughing. My mother was telling me stories of when she was young, how she had met my father. Suddenly my father appeared at the kitchen door with that strange, kind of empty look. He just stood there, staring at me as if seeing something no one else saw. My mother noticed, called to him, "Ernest, is everything okay?" He blinked, came back to himself, and went inside without saying anything. My mother was worried, I saw. She held my hand and said quietly, "Laura, if your father if he ever does something weird, you tell me, okay?" I didn't understand, but agreed. But I never got a chance to tell her anything, because 3 months later, when I had just turned 13, my mother Maddie died. Part 2. After Mother's death. My mother Maddie died of pneumonia that she caught in the winter of 1960. It all happened so fast, my dears. 1 week she was fine, taking care of the house, sewing. The next, she was bedridden, with high fever, coughing so hard her whole body shook. My father called the doctor, Dr. Anderson, who was the town doctor, but it was too late. The pneumonia had taken over her lungs. I remember the day she died like it was yesterday. It was a gray, cold afternoon, with that icy wind that cuts through your skin. I was sitting by her bed, holding her hand, and she looked at me with those tired eyes and said very quietly, "Laura, my daughter, take care of your father. He's going to need you very much." Then she looked at my father, who was on the other side of the bed, and said, "Ernest, our girl is growing up. Let her grow, my dear. Promise me." My father didn't promise anything. He just stayed there, holding her hand, crying silently. She closed her eyes that afternoon and didn't open them again. She was only 38 years old. The wake was in our living room, which was the custom back then. Neighbors came, friends from church, the ladies from the neighborhood who had sewing work with my mother. Everyone crying, praying the rosary, talking about Maddie, how good she was, hard-working, kind. My father sat the whole time in a chair near the casket, not talking to anyone. He just looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before. It was a mix of pain, anger, and something else I couldn't identify. After the funeral, the house became empty, you know? It felt like it had lost its light. My mother was the sun of that house, and without her, everything became dark and cold. My brother Arnold, who was already 20, stayed with us for 2 more weeks and then announced he was leaving. He had gotten a job in Charlotte at a furniture factory and was going to try life there. I cried so much when he left. I begged him to take me with him, but he said he couldn't, that I was too young, that I had to stay and take care of Father, and that's how I was left alone with him, alone with my father Ernest. At first, he was very quiet. Spent his days at the carpentry shop, working in silence, came home at night, ate what I prepared. I had learned to cook from my mother, thank God, and went to sleep. He barely spoke to me. It was like he had become a statue of sadness. But after about 3 months, things started to change. And they changed in a way that scared me. I started noticing he was looking at me differently. It wasn't a bad look. It wasn't that kind of thing that sometimes happens, thank God. It was something else. It was like he looked at me and didn't see the 13-year-old Laura that I was. It was like he saw a small child. One day I was in the kitchen making dinner. I remember it was a pot roast, and he came home early from the carpentry shop. He came in, looked me up and down, and suddenly said, "Laura, what are those clothes?" I was wearing a simple skirt that my mother had made for me, a skirt I'd been wearing for months. "It's my skirt, Dad," I replied, not understanding. He shook his head with that serious face and said, "No, not that. Little girls don't wear skirts like that." Go put on that little girl dress that's in your closet. I didn't know what to say. But Dad, that dress is too small for me. I wore it when I was 10. He slammed his hand on the table, hard, and I got scared. I told you to change your clothes, Laura. Obey your father. I ran to the bedroom, scared, and went to look for that dress. I found it at the back of the closet, tight, way too short. I put it on with difficulty, could barely close the seams. When I came back to the kitchen, he looked at me, and for the first time in months, he smiled. That's it. That's my little princess. That was just the beginning, my dears. Just the beginning. In the following weeks, he started forbidding me from doing things. He forbade me from using the lipstick my mother had given me, that light pink lipstick I wore only on Sundays to go to church. Little girls don't wear makeup, he said, and threw the lipstick in the trash. He forbade me from putting my hair up, said I had to wear it in 2 braids like when I was a child. He forbade me from going out alone to visit Bernice. Children don't walk alone in the street, he'd say. I tried to argue, tried to say I was already a young lady, that I was already 13, soon to be 14. But he'd get angry, yell, say I was being disobedient, that my mother was in heaven seeing me disappointing my father. And I'd shut up, scared and confused. One afternoon, I came back from school. I was still studying at the time, attending junior high, and found my father sitting in the living room with a large package in his hands. He had that little smile on his face, that little smile that had started giving me chills. Laura, come here, my daughter. Daddy brought you a surprise. I opened the package. Inside was a big rag doll with embroidered eyes and a little calico dress. And there was also a set of toy pots and pans, those small aluminum ones, to play house. I stared at it, not understanding. Dad, I don't play with dolls anymore. I'm almost 14. His smile disappeared instantly. His face became hard. His eyes darkened. You will play, Laura. You'll play because I'm telling you to. Girls have to play with dolls. Sit down there now and play. He pointed to the living room floor. I looked at him, saw there was no way to argue. I sat on the floor, picked up the doll, and pretended I was playing. He stayed there, sitting in the chair, watching me with that strange, almost happy look. That's it, just like that, my little princess playing, just like before. Just like when she was tiny. My dears, I started to get very scared indeed. But I had no one to turn to. My brother was far away in Charlotte. My mother had died. My neighbors, well, back then you didn't meddle in other families' business, you know. And my father was respected in town. He was a hard-working man, had a good reputation. Who would believe me if I said he was treating me like a baby? Things got worse over time. He started treating me more and more like a child. Made me sit on his lap at night while he listened to the radio. Forced me to call him Daddy in a childish voice. Bought more toys, dolls, teddy bears, wooden puzzles. Filled my room with these things. Took away my young lady clothes and bought children's dresses, even if they were tight on me. When I turned 15, he wouldn't even let me celebrate, wouldn't let me have a party, wouldn't let me invite friends from school. He said birthdays were grown-up nonsense and that I didn't need that. On the day, he came home with a small chocolate cake and made me blow out the candle alone, right there in the kitchen, just the 2 of us. Then he sang Happy Birthday with that off-key voice of his, picked me up. Imagine 15 years old, and he's picking me up, and said, Daddy will always take care of his little girl. Always. Will never let the dirty world touch you. I stopped going to school when I turned 16. He said I didn't need to study anymore, that women didn't need education, that I had to stay home learning to take care of the house, to cook, to clean. Actually, I think he was afraid that at school I'd talk to someone, that I'd tell someone how he was treating me. I started living like a prisoner in my own home. Couldn't go out, couldn't have friends, couldn't do anything. Spent my days cleaning, cooking, and being forced to play with those horrible dolls he bought. At night, he'd make me sit on the living room floor, and he'd sit in the chair and watch me play, hours and hours, until I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. There was one night I tried to talk to him seriously. I gathered courage, took a deep breath, and said, "Dad, this can't go on. I need to live. I need to have friends, need to go back to school, need to grow up. This isn't right." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something that froze my blood. It wasn't anger. It was madness. Pure madness. He slowly stood up from the chair, came to me, held my face between his hands, those big, calloused carpenter's hands, and said very quietly, almost whispering, "You're not going to grow up, Laura. You're never going to grow up. You'll always be my little girl. Always. Because when you grow up, you'll leave me, just like Maddie left me. And I'm not going to let that happen. Never." In that moment, I understood. My father had gone mad with grief. My mother's death had broken something inside his head, and he had decided that if he kept me as a child forever, I would never grow up, never get married, never leave. I would stay with him forever. I was 17 years old when I met George. Part 3. Meeting George. It was on a sunny day in March 1964 that I met George. I had just turned 17 and had gone alone, sneaking away from my father, of course, to the town square to buy sewing thread that had run out at home. My father had gone to deliver furniture across town, and I took advantage of those few minutes of freedom. I was looking at the fabric store window when I bumped into someone accidentally. I dropped the little packet of pins I had in my hand. "Sorry, miss," said a deep, kind voice. I looked up and saw a tall young man, dark-haired, with light brown eyes and a nice smile. He bent down, picked up my pins from the ground, and handed them to me. "Here you go. Don't worry about it." "Thank you," I murmured, my face burning with embarrassment. It had been so long since I'd talked to anyone from outside the house, much less a young man. "My name is George Henry Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I work at the sheriff's office here in Asheville. I'm an administrative assistant to the sheriff. And you are—" I looked around, afraid someone would see and tell my father. "Laura," I answered quietly, "I have to go." And I almost ran away, my heart beating fast. But fate has its ways. I ran into George other times. He always showed up in that area, and later I learned it wasn't a coincidence. He had noticed something strange about me in that first meeting. The scared manner, the clothes too childish for my age, the fear in my eyes. George was an observant man, trained to notice when something wasn't right, and something in him wanted to help me. We started talking quickly, in secret, always when my father wasn't around. George would ask me about my life, about my family. At first I lied, said everything was fine, but one day I couldn't take it. I broke down in tears right there in the little park and told him everything. I told him about my father's obsession, about how he treated me like a child, about how I was trapped in that house, in that life that wasn't a life. George listened to me carefully, with that serious way of his. When I finished, he held my hand. It was the first time someone had held my hand with affection since my mother died, and said, "Laura, this isn't normal. Your father needs help. And you need to get out of this situation." But how, my dears? How could I get out? I had nowhere to go, no money, nobody. My brother Arnold was far away in Charlotte, and we barely had contact. George then proposed something. "Date me, in secret, for now. I'll figure out a way to get you out of that house, I promise." And that's how our courtship began. We met in secret, always in discreet places, away from downtown where my father might see. George treated me like a young woman, like a real woman. He talked to me about serious things, made me laugh, made me feel alive for the first time in years. I had fallen in love, my dears, truly in love. For almost 3 years we managed to keep it secret. But in 1966, when I was 19, my father found out. It was late afternoon. I had gone out to buy bread at the bakery one of the few things he still let me do alone, and met George on the corner, as planned. We talked for just a few minutes. He held my hand, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead. And that's when my father appeared. He had left the carpentry shop early and had come a different way. He saw everything. His face turned purple with rage. He came running in our direction, shouting, "Let go of my daughter! Let her go, you dog!" George stood in front of me, protecting me. "Sir, you need to calm down. Laura and I are dating. I have serious intentions toward her." My father laughed, but it was a scary laugh without joy. "Serious intentions? With my little girl? She's 5 years old. She's a child." George looked at my father with that look of someone who works with disturbed people and understood right away. "Mr. Thompson, Laura is 19 years old. She's an adult woman." "Liar!" shouted my father, and lunged at George. There was a commotion right there in the street. People gathered. Someone called the sheriff. In the end, George had to leave and I was dragged home by my father. What happened next, my dears, was the darkest period of my life. My father locked me in the house, literally. Put new locks on the doors, put bars on the windows. Said I had been a disobedient girl, that I had acted up, that I needed punishment. He started treating me even worse. Forced me to wear only baby dresses, dresses he sewed himself since he couldn't find them in my size in stores anymore. Made me sit in a high chair, one of those for babies, to eat. He even bought a baby bottle, my dears, a large bottle, and forced me to drink milk from it at night. "Babies have to have their bottle before bed," he'd say, with that glazed look of madness. I cried, begged, screamed. But it was no use. The neighbors must have heard, but nobody did anything. Back then, people didn't interfere. It's a family matter, they thought. There was one night I tried to escape. I waited for him to sleep, managed to open my bedroom window. Even with the bars, I was skinny, thought I could get through. I almost made it, already had half my body outside, when I felt those big hands pulling me back. He had woken up. He dragged me back to the bedroom, threw me on the bed, and for the first time, he raised his hand to me. He didn't hit me hard. It wasn't that kind of violence. But he slapped me across the face and yelled, "Disobedient girl, very disobedient girl, you'll go without your doll for a week." I curled up on the bed, trembling with fear and rage. That night, staring at the bedroom ceiling, I thought about giving up on everything. Thought I'd be stuck there forever, trapped in that madness, until my father died or until I went mad too. But then, one morning, there was a knock on the door. My father went to answer. It was George, accompanied by the sheriff and a pastor from the church. George had spent months gathering evidence, talking to neighbors, to the town doctor, explaining the situation. He had managed to convince the sheriff and the pastor to intervene. They entered the house, saw the state of things, the baby toys scattered around, the children's dresses, the baby bottle on the kitchen table, the bars on the windows. They saw me, 19 years old, dressed like a 5-year-old child. The pastor talked to my father for hours, explained that this wasn't love, it was imprisonment, that I needed to live, get married, have my own family. The sheriff was more direct. Either my father allowed the marriage, or he'd have to answer for false imprisonment. My father cried like a child, clutching the chair, screaming, "You're going to take my little girl away. You're going to let her go away, and I'll be alone, alone like when Maddie died." In the end, after much conversation, my father agreed. But it wasn't a happy consent. It was a defeat for him, and he made that very clear. The wedding was scheduled in a hurry, 2 weeks later in January 1967, right after I turned 20. It was in the small neighborhood church, with only a few people present: George, me, the pastor, the sheriff as witness, and some church ladies. My father didn't go. Said he wouldn't watch his daughter's death. But on the morning of the wedding, a boy arrived at the church with a note. It was from my father. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, written in his crooked handwriting, was, "You can play house, but at night children come back to the crib." Daddy always knows where his little girl is. My dears, those words chilled me. Even on my wedding day, even getting out of his house, I knew I wasn't free. My father wasn't going to give up, wasn't going to accept it. But I had George by my side, and George, without my knowing, was already preparing something to ensure that when my father tried to get me, and we knew he would try, I would be protected. Part 4. The New House and the Visits. After the wedding, George and I moved into a small single-story house he had rented in a neighborhood farther from downtown Asheville, a place called Mountain View, which at the time was very quiet, with few houses, still lots of woods. George had chosen it on purpose. He thought the farther from my father, the safer we'd be. The house was simple, white painted wood, with a low little gate in front and a small backyard. It had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, kitchen and bathroom. For me, my dears, that house represented everything: freedom, a fresh start, the chance to finally be a woman, be a wife, live without pretending to be a child. The first 2 days were magical. Waking up in the morning next to George, making breakfast for the 2 of us, fixing up the house our way, talking about the plans we had. He'd leave for work at the sheriff's office early in the morning, and I'd stay taking care of the house, cooking, humming while I washed clothes. In the evening, we'd sit on the porch, George would smoke a cigarette, and we'd talk about having children, about improving the house little by little, about the future that was finally ours. But on the 3rd day, my dears, reality knocked on the door. Literally. It was mid-morning. George had already left for work. I was in the kitchen making bread. I had gotten up early to knead the dough, let it rise, and was just putting the pans in the oven when I heard a noise at the front of the house. Footsteps at the little gate. My heart raced. I went to the living room window and peeked through the curtain. It was him, my father. There, standing on the other side of the gate with a large rag doll in his arms and a package under his other arm. He didn't try to open the gate. Just stood there, staring at the house with that empty look that gave me chills. I hid behind the curtain, my whole body shaking. I stayed there, peeking, praying for him to leave. He stood still for about 15 minutes that felt like hours, and then left the doll leaning against the gate and walked away, walking slowly, looking back every few steps. I waited another half hour before I had the courage to open the door. I picked up the doll with disgust. There was a little note tied around its neck with string. The little girl forgot her doll at home. Daddy brought it. Daddy always takes care of what's his. I tore that note into 1,000 pieces, threw the doll in the trash, and spent the rest of the day locked inside the house, crying, scared. The bread burned in the oven. When George came home that night, he found me sitting on the kitchen floor, hugging my knees, trembling. He hugged me, carried me to the couch, and when I showed him the pieces of the note, I saw his face become hard, serious. He's not going to give up, Laura. We need to be prepared. And he didn't give up. In the following days, my father came back. Not every day, but yes, several times a week. Always at different times, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, when he knew George was working. He never knocked on the door, never yelled. Just stood there on the other side of the gate, standing like a sinister statue, looking at the house, searching for me with his eyes at the windows. And he always left something. Baby toys, pacifiers, baby bottles, diapers. Once he left a disassembled wooden crib leaning against the gate, a crib he had made himself in his carpentry shop. And there was always a little note. Baby needs a crib to sleep, said one. Daddy prepared the little girl's room, said another. Children can't stay away from father. They get sick. My dears, I started living in a constant state of terror. I was afraid to look out the window and see him there. I was afraid to go out in the yard to hang laundry. I was afraid to go to the corner store to shop. When George left for work, I'd lock all the doors and windows, even in the heat, and stay inside, sweating, scared, waiting for him to come back. The nightmares began. Every night I dreamed that my father entered the house, tied me up with that thick rope he used in the carpentry shop, wrapped me up like a package, and dragged me back to that prison. I dreamed he put me in that crib, stuck a pacifier in my mouth, dressed me in diapers. I'd wake up screaming, sweating, and George had to calm me down, hug me, tell me it was just a nightmare, that he was there, that he wouldn't let anything happen. George tried to file a complaint at the sheriff's office. He talked to the sheriff, explained the situation, showed the notes, the things my father left at the gate. But the sheriff, who was a drinking buddy of my father's, had whiskey with him every Friday at Mr. Albert's bar, didn't want to know. Said it was a family matter, that a father has the right to visit his daughter, that leaving gifts isn't a crime. George argued, pounded the table, but it was no use. The sheriff told him to leave and stop making trouble for a working man. We tried talking to the church pastor, the same one who had married us. He came to our house, talked to us, was concerned. He promised he'd talk to my father, would try to make him understand that this wasn't normal, that I was married now, that I had my own life. But when the pastor went to my father's house, he was greeted with shouts. My father said that pastors don't meddle in family business, that Laura is his daughter and always will be, and practically threw the pastor out. We were alone, my dears, alone with that fear. The weeks went by. January turned into February. I got thinner, got deep circles under my eyes, nervous, scared by any noise. George did what he could, started coming home at lunchtime to see if I was okay, asked the neighbor next door, Mrs. Clementine, a good lady, a widow, to keep an eye out, visit me sometimes. But there was nothing that would take that fear out of me, because deep down, I knew. My father wasn't going to be content to stay at the gate forever. At some point, he was going to try to come in. At some point, he was going to try to take me by force. And that's what happened one night at the end of February. Part 5. The Night of Terror. George had stayed late at the sheriff's office, had to finish some urgent reports. I was home alone. It was almost 10 at night. I was in the kitchen finishing washing the dinner dishes, looking through the little kitchen window at the dark backyard outside, when I heard a sound that froze my blood. Someone was messing with the bedroom window. That sound of wood being forced, the creaking of old wood giving way. I dropped the plate I was holding. It fell in the sink and broke, and stood paralyzed there, my heart beating so hard I could hear the sound of it inside my head. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. But then the sound came again, and then I heard the worst sound in the world, the bedroom window opening. Someone had entered my house. I turned off the kitchen light instinctively, hid behind the table, crouching down, covering my mouth with both hands so I wouldn't scream, so I wouldn't make noise. Tears ran hot down my face. I knew who it was. I knew. Laura? The voice came from the bedroom. That voice I'd known since I was born, but which now filled me with dread. Little girl, where are you? Daddy came to get you, sweetheart. Enough of this silly game of house. Let's go to the real home, to Daddy's home. I heard his footsteps. Heavy, slow steps, searching. He entered the living room. Through the crack under the table, I could see his boots, those worn leather boots he wore to work. And I saw something else that made my whole body tremble. He was dragging something on the floor, something that made a rough sound on the wood, a rope. Daddy knows you're here, Laura. There's no use hiding. You're my little girl, mine forever. Nobody takes a daughter from her father. Nobody. He kept walking, went to the kitchen. It was dark, but he knew I was there. He could sense it. That's when I saw, in the little light coming from the street through the window, hanging around his neck, swinging as he moved, a pacifier, an old, yellowed pacifier. In that moment, my dears, everything became clear. He hadn't come just to convince me. He had come to take me by force. He was going to tie me up with that rope, drag me like an animal, and take me back to that house, to that hell. And the pacifier was to silence me, to make me become his baby again. Something inside me broke at that moment. It wasn't just fear. It was rage. Rage for 20 years of imprisonment. Rage for being treated like an object. Rage for having my life stolen. Rage for still being hunted. I wasn't going to let it happen. I'd rather die there, in that kitchen, than go back. My hand found the carving knife in the sink. I gripped it tight. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it, but I held on. If he finds me, I thought, if he tries to grab me, I'll defend myself. This time I'll defend myself. He lit a match. The yellow, flickering light illuminated his face. My dears, that was no longer the man who raised me. That was a stranger, a madman with bulging, glazed eyes, mouth open in a crooked smile that had nothing of joy in it. He had completely lost his mind. There was no going back. And it was at that exact moment that I heard the front gate burst open. Running footsteps. George's voice shouting, "Laura! Laura! Where are you? Answer me!" My father heard, quickly put out the match. I took advantage and stood up, screaming with all the strength I had. "George, here! My father's in here!" George burst through the front door, literally broke it down, and came running in. He turned on the light. My father tried to run to the bedroom, tried to get out through the window he'd entered. But George was faster, younger, stronger. He grabbed my father, they both fell to the floor, rolled, fought. I was screaming, crying. The rope fell from my father's hand. The pacifier came loose from his neck and ended up under the couch. Mrs. Clementine, the neighbor, appeared at the door with other neighbors who had heard the commotion. They helped George hold my father, who was kicking, screaming like a madman. "Let me go! She's my daughter, my little girl. I just want to take her home. She needs her daddy. She needs him." The police came. But you know what they did, my dears? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sheriff arrived, looked at the situation, talked to my father outside, and decided it had been a misunderstanding. Said my father just wanted to talk to his daughter and that he had climbed through the window because we wouldn't open the door. It didn't matter that there was a rope. It didn't matter that there was a pacifier. It didn't matter that I was terrified, crying, with a knife in my hand from so much fear. The sheriff sent my father away with a warning not to come back. But I saw in my father's eyes when the police let him go. I saw him look at me before leaving, and in that look there was a promise. He was coming back. He would definitely come back. That night I couldn't close my eyes. I sat on the bed, hugging George, shaking from 4 to 6 in the morning. He stayed awake with me, holding me, stroking my hair, saying everything would be okay. But we both knew the truth. This wasn't over. And it was there, in that cold early morning at the end of February, with my father's rope still lying on the living room floor and the yellowed pacifier under the couch, that George said to me, with that determined voice of his, "Laura, he's going to try again. Sick people like that don't give up. But next time, I promise you, we'll be prepared. I'm going to protect you, no matter what." And he started planning, preparing, transforming that simple little house into a silent fortress, waiting for the next attack. Because we knew my father was coming back. And when he came back, this time, it would be different. Part 6. The Trap. In the days following that invasion, George completely changed. He had always been a calm, peaceful man. But now, there was a determination in his eyes I'd never seen. He'd leave in the morning for work, but come back at lunchtime with bags full of strange things, rolls of wire, tools, pieces of metal, things I didn't understand what they were for. "What's all this, George?" I asked one of those times. He looked at me, serious, and said, "Protection, Laura. Your father's coming back, and when he comes back, we're going to be ready. But I need you to trust me, okay? Don't ask questions, just trust." I trusted. I spent the next few days watching my husband work in the house, like he was a carpenter, an electrician, an inventor. He worked on the windows, especially the bedroom one, the one my father had come through. He installed new bolts on the inside, but left it apparently easy to open from the outside. "It has to look weak," he explained. "It has to look like that's where he can get in again." He spent hours working on the bedroom floor, right under the window. He spread something that looked like glue, but I wasn't sure. He covered it with a thin rug. "If he steps here," George murmured, more to himself than to me, "his feet will stick. Not for long, but enough." Then he started working with a thin, transparent wire. It was fishing line, one of those really strong ones fishermen use to catch big fish. He tied this wire right at shin height, crossing the window entrance from one side to the other, almost invisible in the dark. "This will make him trip," George explained, testing the tension of the wire. "And when he trips—" He showed me what he had prepared. On the nightstand beside the bed, hidden behind some books, was a camera flash, except it was a powerful spotlight he had borrowed from the sheriff's office photographer. It was pointed directly at the window. "When he trips on the wire, it'll pull this mechanism here." George showed me an ingenious little system he had assembled with wire and a spring, "and the spotlight will turn on right in his face. It'll blind him for a few seconds. Enough time." "Enough time for what?" I asked, still not quite understanding. George then took me to the bedroom closet. Inside, right at the top, he had hung a cargo net, kind of rolled up, held by a rope. "This rope here is connected to the headboard of the bed. When I pull, and I'll pull as soon as he falls and is blinded by the light, this net will drop right on top of him. It'll tangle him all up." My dears, I looked at all that and thought, my husband has gone crazy too. But I didn't say anything, because deep down, I knew he was right. My father was coming back, and we needed to be prepared. George explained the plan to me. "When your father tries to come in again, and he will try, Laura, I'm sure of it, you're going to pretend you're sleeping. No matter what happens, you stay quiet in bed. I'll be beside you, also pretending. Let him come in, let him step on the wire, and then I'll take care of the rest." We spent 3 nights awake, waiting. 3 nights of vigil, lying in bed, tense, listening to every little noise outside. On the 3rd night, I was so tired I had almost really fallen asleep. That's when I heard it. That little sound of the window being tampered with. It was almost 2 in the morning. It was raining outside, a light, continuous rain. George squeezed my hand under the blanket. The signal. I pretended I was still sleeping, but my heart was beating so hard I thought it would jump out of my mouth. The window opened. I heard the familiar creak, and then I heard his voice, that voice that haunted my nightmares. "Laura, Daddy's little girl. Daddy came back to get you. This time you're coming with me. Daddy prepared everything. The little room is ready, the crib is ready. Let's go home." He started to come in. I heard the sound of his boot touching the floor inside the room. I breathed slowly, pretending to sleep, tears silently running down my face. And then it happened. He took another step and, crack, his foot stuck in that glue George had spread. He tried to lift his foot, not understanding. In that moment of confusion, he took another step forward and, zoom! The fishing line caught his shin. My father tripped, lost his balance, and at the exact moment he fell forward, the mechanism activated and, flash! That powerful spotlight turned on right in his face, a light so bright that even I, with my eyes closed, saw the glare. "Ah, my eyes!" my father yelled, bringing his hands to his face, temporarily blinded by the intense light in the darkness. That's when George jumped out of bed. He pulled the rope from the headboard with force. I heard the sound, and in a second, that cargo net dropped from the closet right on top of my father, who was half fallen on the floor, half standing, trying to balance and see at the same time. The net fell perfectly, covering him completely, tangling in his arms, his legs. My father started to struggle, yelling, "Let go! Let me go! I just want my daughter! She's mine!" George turned on the bedroom light. He jumped over the bed and went for my father, and that's when he saw it, fallen on the floor next to my father, the rope. That thick rope, the same one he had brought the first time. With a bitter smile, George picked up the rope. You brought the right tool, sir, he said, with that calm, cold voice. Now I'm going to use it the way it should be used. And he used it. With the help of the net that was already holding my father, George wrapped that rope around him, tied his arms, tied his legs, made tight knots, sailor's knots, that he had learned when he was a boy. My father was kicking, screaming, crying, "Laura, my little girl, Daddy just wants to take care of you. Don't let him hurt me." I had gotten up from the bed, was standing there, shaking, watching that scene. My father, tied up with the very rope he had brought to tie me up. George ran to Mrs. Clementine's house, knocked on the door, asked her to call the police. He came running back. He stayed there, holding my father on the floor, while I curled up in a corner of the room, crying. When the police arrived, about 15 minutes later, they found that scene. My father, tied up like a package, crying and screaming, "She's my little girl, mine. I just want to take care of her, give her a bottle, change her diaper, she needs me." The sheriff arrived too. This time another policeman came, a younger one, who looked at the situation with disgust. This young policeman went to the gate where my father's car was parked and decided to look inside. My dears, what they found in that car gives me chills to this day. In the back seat, a package of adult diapers, baby bottles, pacifiers, a baby blanket, and worse, bottles of medicine, sedatives, strong sleeping pills. The policeman came back with all that in his hands, showed it to the sheriff and said he was going to drug her. He was going to leave her doped up, take her away, and keep her like that. Look at the amount of medicine here. It was at that moment that even the sheriff, my father's friend, turned white. Because this was no longer a family matter. This was kidnapping, imprisonment. This was a serious crime. My father was taken away that night. Tied up in his own rope, crying like a child, screaming, "I just want my baby! Give me back my baby! She needs her bottle!" In the following days, there was an inquiry. The town doctor, Dr. Anderson, examined my father and gave the diagnosis: severe psychosis, delusion, pathological obsession. He had truly gone mad with my mother's death, and that madness had fixated on me. My father was committed to a psychiatric institution in Charlotte. He spent years there. I never saw him again. Never wanted to. George told me it was better that way, that I needed to move on with my life, and he was right. That night, after the police took my father away, after Mrs. Clementine made chamomile tea for me and went home, after George cleaned up the mess in the bedroom, put everything back in order, we lay in bed, hugging. "It's over, Laura," he whispered in my ear. "It's really over. You're free." So, and for the first time in 20 years, my dears, I took a deep breath and felt that it was true. I was free. Finally, completely free. Epilogue. Life after freedom. And here I am, my dears, at 78 years old, sitting on the porch of my little house here in Asheville, the same Asheville where I was born, where I suffered, but also where I found my George and where I built my real life. After that night when my father was taken away, George and I stayed in the little house in Mountain View for 2 more years. In 1969, we managed to buy our own home, this one where I live to this day, in a more central neighborhood near the church. It's a simple house, brick, painted light yellow, with a front garden that I care for lovingly, and a little backyard where George planted a grapevine that still produces grapes to this day. We had 3 children, my dears, 3 blessings. Marcus was born in 1968, Sylvia in 1971, and the youngest, Julia, the one who taught me to record these videos, was born in 1975. I raised my children with all the love I didn't have when I was young. I let them be real children, play, get dirty, grow up free. I never treated them the way I was treated. George helped me with that, always reminded me, "Laura, let them live." George, my dear George, passed away 5 years ago in 2020. It was his heart. He went in his sleep without suffering. I thank God for that, for him not suffering. We were married for 53 years, my dears. 53 years beside the man who saved me, who protected me, who taught me what true love was. I miss him every day. I miss the way he drank his coffee, making that slurping sound. I miss him complaining that I put too much sugar in the coffee. I miss sleeping hugging him. But I'm not sad, because I know he lived well, that we were happy, that we built a beautiful family. And I know he's up there, watching over me, over our children, over our grandchildren. Today my life is simple and peaceful, just the way I always dreamed. I wake up early, make my coffee, sit here on the porch, and watch the day dawn. I take care of my plants. I have geraniums, violets, a jasmine plant that perfumes everything when it blooms, and the herbs I use to season food: basil, parsley, chives. George used to say my garden was the most beautiful on the street, and I keep taking care of it as if he were still here to see it. My children live here in Asheville, thank God. Marcus works at a hardware store. He's married to Patricia and gave me 3 grandchildren: Gabriel, Isabella, and Peter. Sylvia is a teacher at a public school. She married Ronald and has 2 beautiful girls, Sophia and Helena. And my Julia, the youngest, works at an accounting office. She's married to Fernando and has 2 boys, Lucas and Matthew. My 7 grandchildren are my joy, my dears. They come to my house almost every day, some for lunch, others just to visit Grandma and eat a piece of cake. I make coffee cake, I make homemade bread, I make cornbread, those delicious things that children love. The kitchen gets full of noise, laughter, mess, and I love every second of it. On Sunday afternoons, the house is packed. All 3 children come with their husbands and wives. All 7 grandchildren come, and we make a big lunch. I make pot roast like my mother used to make. I make salad. I make dessert. Everyone sits at that big kitchen table, which George made. He learned carpentry from my father way back, before everything happened. And we eat, talk, laugh. The grandchildren ask me to tell stories from my time, and I tell them, leaving out the bad parts. I tell them about old games, what Asheville was like when I was a child, the mischief I used to do with Bernice. At night, when I'm alone, sometimes I think about the past. I think about my mother Maddie, who left so early and who I'm sure would be proud of the woman I became. I think about my father, too. He died in 1985, in the psychiatric institution where he was committed. They notified me, asked if I wanted to go to the funeral. I didn't go. I couldn't. I still had too much hurt, too much pain. Today, at the age I am, I can understand that he got sick, that madness took over him after my mother died. I can't forgive everything he did, but I can understand it was the illness. It wasn't him anymore. My life is full of small joys, my dears. The joy of waking up in the morning and hearing the birds singing. The joy of making bread and smelling the scent spreading through the house. The joy of receiving visits from the grandchildren. The joy of sitting here on the porch in the late afternoon, with my shawl around my shoulders and watching the street activity. The joy of knowing I'm free, that I built my family, that I won. I look back and see how far I've come. I left a prison, a life that wasn't a life, and built this. A house full of love, wonderful children and grandchildren, beautiful memories. It's been 58 years of freedom, 58 years really living, being Laura, being a woman, being a mother, being a grandmother. And you know what's most beautiful, my dears? It's that my children grew up free. They grew up knowing they were loved, that they could be whoever they wanted to be. And now my grandchildren are also growing up that way. The chain was broken. The cycle was interrupted. And that fills me with gratitude. Sometimes Julia asks me if I'm afraid those bad memories will come back to haunt me. I say no, because that was only one part of my life. It was a dark period, but it wasn't everything. The rest, everything that came after, was light. It was love. It was real life. And I thank God every day for giving me the strength to survive, for putting George in my path, and for allowing me to live everything I live today. Final message. My dears, I've reached the end of my story. And I know it was hard to hear, but it was important to tell. Because if there's someone out there going through something similar, whether it's control, obsession, or any kind of imprisonment that won't let you live, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And there is a way out. I learned many things in these 78 years of life, and I want to leave some of them here for you. I learned that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates. Love that locks doors, that forbids, that controls, that infantilizes. That's not love, that's sickness, it's imprisonment. No one who truly loves you wants to keep you from growing, from living, from being who you are. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. I spent years thinking there was no way out, that no one would believe me. But when George appeared and I finally had the courage to tell, things started to change. Don't be ashamed to speak up, to shout, to ask for help. There are good people in the world. There are people who will listen to you and help you. I learned that we can indeed start over, no matter how many years we've lost. I was 20 years old when I managed to escape that prison. 20 years of stolen life. But I still had 58 years of freedom ahead. 58 years of happiness, family, true love. It's never too late to start again. I learned that the past doesn't need to define the future. I could have let that trauma destroy me, could have become a bitter person, full of fear. But I chose to live. I chose to be a mother, be a grandmother, be happy, and you can choose that too. I learned that breaking chains is the greatest legacy we can leave. My children grew up free because I was freed. My grandchildren are growing up in love because I chose love. When you save yourself, you also save the generations that come after. And I learned, my dears, that intelligence beats brute force. George didn't defeat my father with violence. He used his head, planned, and used my father's own weapon against him. Sometimes we don't need physical strength to defend ourselves. We need intelligence, patience, strategy. If you or someone you know is going through a situation of control, psychological abuse, imprisonment within their own home, seek help. In every country, in every city, there are people and organizations ready to help. Seek the authorities, seek support groups, seek the church if you're religious, seek a teacher, a trusted neighbor. Don't give up. Freedom exists, and you deserve it. I want to thank all of you who stayed here with me until the end of this story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, but if it helped even one person, every word was worth it. Now I'd like to ask you something. If you liked the video, click that like button to help me out. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos, because I still have many stories to tell, some sad, some happy, but all true. And tell me in the comments, what time of day are you watching this video? Morning, afternoon, or evening? And what city are you from? I read all the comments, and I love knowing that there are people from all over the country and even from abroad listening to me. A kiss to the heart of each one of you. And remember, life is meant to be lived in freedom. Never give up on that. When my husband took me to that clinic, he whispered in my ear, "You'll never have children, Clara. I paid the doctor to cut you up inside." But God had other plans, and revenge came from my own womb 3 weeks later. Hello, my dear ones. What a joy to have you here with me this afternoon. Come on in, have a seat. Imagine you're right here in my little living room, having a hot cup of coffee with some homemade pound cake. My name is Clara Beatrice Santos. I'm 73 years old, and I was born right here in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And it's right here where I live to this day, in this town I've carried in my heart since I came into this world. Oh, and before I continue my story, I'd like to make a special request to all of you listening out there. Tell me here in the comments, what little town or big city are you watching me from? And what time of day did you find this video from Grandma Clara? Was it early morning, still having your coffee? At lunchtime? Or in the late afternoon, when the day's rush has calmed down? I always read all the comments with so much love, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and what moment of the day you dedicated to hearing this story. Tell me, will you, my dear? Let's create a chain of love across America and the whole world. And if you can, Click that little like button down there and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories from this grandma. I promise it's worth it. But I'll tell you, my dear, life hasn't always been so peaceful for me. There was a time, a very difficult time, when I didn't know if I'd have the strength to continue. A time when a man, who should have loved and protected me, tried to take from me what's most sacred in a woman. And this story, as painful as it is to remember, needs to be told. Because today, when I look at my blooming garden, when I see my son and grandchildren playing here in the yard, I know that every tear, every night of fear, every moment of loneliness was worth it. So grab your coffee, settle into your chair, and come with me on this journey that begins back when I was 20 years old, when I was a young woman, full of dreams and innocence, and thought that marrying a rich man would bring me happiness. Oh, if only I had known. I was born right here in Cedar Falls on a cold day in June 1952, when the Iowa winter was already getting serious. My father's name was Arnold Frederick Santos, a tall man with broad shoulders who worked on the ranches around town. He took care of cattle, helped with farm work, and came home always with calloused hands and the smell of leather and coffee. He was a man of few words, you know. But when he spoke, we listened. My mother, Teresa, was the opposite. She talked a mile a minute, laughed loudly, hummed all day while taking care of the house and us kids. We were 5 siblings in total. I was the third, right in the middle of the bunch. There was Lawrence, the oldest, who helped Dad on the farm from a young age. Then came Naomi, about 3 years older than me, who was Mom's favorite and learned to sew and embroider from early on. I came after, and right behind were born the twins, Oscar and Oliver, who were the troublemakers of the house. Wherever they went, it was just shouting and broken things. We lived in a very simple wooden house over on the south side, on a dirt road that turned into a muddy mess when it rained. The house had just 3 little rooms, 1 bedroom where my father and mother slept, another where the 5 of us squeezed into 2 old iron beds, and the living room that also served as a kitchen. There was a wood stove that my mother kept always burning, and it was around it that we huddled on the coldest winter days. The bathroom was outside, in the backyard, a little wooden shed we avoided using at night because it was scary. In the yard there was also a chicken coop, some laying hens that provided our eggs, and an apple tree that gave the sweetest fruit I've ever tasted. Our routine was marked by work from early on. I woke up with the rooster's crow around 5:30 in the morning and already had to help my mother. Fetch water from the well down the street, light the fire, prepare coffee and milk for Dad and my siblings. Then, when the sun was higher, I'd go to school, Cedar Falls Elementary, which was about 6 blocks from home. I loved studying, you know. Loved picking up those notebooks, writing neatly, learning arithmetic. My teacher, Mrs. Nelson, always said I had a knack for it, that I learned quickly. That made me proud. Coming back from school, around lunchtime, I had to help again. Peel potatoes, wash clothes in the tub, hang them on the line, sweep the house. But when there was spare time, oh my God, how we had fun. Me and the neighborhood girls, Gina, Yvonne, Susie, we played house under the trees, made pretend food with mud and leaves, jumped rope until we got tired. The boys played marbles in the street, flew kites on windy days. And when winter really came, we'd make bonfires in the middle of the street, roast sweet potatoes, stay there telling ghost stories until Mom called us inside. Back then, life was hard, but it was simple too. We had almost nothing, but we didn't know we were poor because everyone around us was the same. My father earned little, and the money barely covered rice, beans, and a piece of meat once in a while. Sometimes we'd eat just cornmeal mush with sausage or bean soup with bone. But my mother had an amazing ability to make tasty food with almost nothing. She always said, "God helps those who rise early, my daughter. We may not have plenty, but we have dignity." I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I started noticing something that made me uneasy. My older sister, Naomi, started receiving visits from a young man. He was about 10 years older than her, son of a rancher in the region, and came to our house from time to time. My mother got all excited about it, tidied up the living room, made a cake, and kept telling Naomi to fix herself up properly, comb her hair, put on her prettiest dress. I saw that Naomi didn't seem very happy about it, but she obeyed. And one day, I heard my mother talking quietly with my father in the kitchen. "Arnold, if this marriage works out, it's Naomi's salvation. She won't have to work as a maid, won't go through hardship. A man with property, a good man." I didn't quite understand what that meant, but something inside me tightened. Was getting married the only way out for us? Were we only valuable if we got a husband who would support us? I was still small, but I was beginning to realize that the world out there was different for men and women. My brothers could go out, run around, study if they wanted. But Naomi and I, we had to stay quiet, well-behaved, learning to be proper young ladies. When I turned 12 in 1964, Naomi married that man. It was a small celebration at the neighborhood church and then lunch at our house. She left there straight to her husband's house on a ranch far from town. I remember crying hidden in the room because I'd missed my sister. But my mother said that's how it was, that soon it would be my turn too, and I had to be prepared. "Clara, you're pretty, you're capable, you'll get a good match too. You just need to behave properly and wait for the right time." And that's how my childhood years went by, between play, work, school, and that feeling that my future was already somewhat decided, even without me having much say in it. The years passed, and I grew up, becoming a young lady. When I turned 15 in 1967, my father took me out of school. He said it was more than enough, that I already knew how to read and write, and now it was time to help my mother at home and learn real chores. I cried in secret for days because I loved studying, but there was no way. A daughter's opinion didn't matter back then. My mother said, "Clara, too much studying makes a girl uppity. What you need is to learn to be a good wife, a good homemaker. The rest doesn't matter." So I spent my days between the washing tub, the wood stove, the sewing and embroidery my mother taught me. I learned to make lace with old Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who had fairy hands. I learned to make homemade bread, coffee cakes, apple butter that's typical here in the Midwest. I learned to iron clothes with a coal iron, to wash bed linens in the tub until my arms hurt, to take care of small children because neighbors called me to help with their babies. I became, as they said, a capable young woman. But inside, I felt like a closed cage, you know? I wanted more. I wanted to know the world, have choices, decide my own path. But fate, or rather, the custom of that time, had other plans for me. In September 1971, when I was 19, I met Arthur Miller Fitzgerald at a cousin's wedding. The celebration was at a big ranch, one of those that had a hall with polished wood floors, crystal chandeliers, and tables full of abundant food. I went with my mother and father, all dressed up in a light blue dress we had bought, especially for the occasion. Arthur was there, talking with some men in the corner of the hall. He must have been about 34 at the time, a tall man with dark hair slicked back with pomade, a well-cut gray suit, shiny leather shoes. He had that look of someone who commands, you know? Of someone who's used to being obeyed. And when he looked at me from across the hall, I felt my heart race. I don't know if it was love or if it was fear disguised as enchantment, but something inside me stirred. He came to talk to me, asked my name, whose daughter I was, where I lived. Talked to my father, asked permission to ask me to dance, and there, in the middle of that hall, dancing a waltz, he whispered in my ear, "You're beautiful, Clara. Very beautiful. And I'm a man who gets everything he wants." My father was delighted with Arthur's attention. After all, everyone knew who the Miller Fitzgerald family was, owners of 3 huge ranches around Cedar Falls, cattle breeders, people with real money. On the way home, my father wouldn't stop talking. "Clara, did you see? A man like that looking at you? It's your chance to have a good life, girl. Don't mess this up." Arthur started visiting me at home. Every week he'd show up, always bringing gifts, A box of chocolates, a silk scarf, flowers. He'd talk with my father in the living room while I served coffee and cake, quiet, as was expected of me. Then he'd ask to take a walk around the nearby park, always with my mother or a sister nearby, because dating alone was improper. He spoke nicely, that Arthur. He talked about how he'd give me a comfortable life, a big house, maids to help me, pretty dresses, plenty. He painted a golden future, and I, who had spent my whole life watching my mother break her back to support the house, thought that was salvation. I didn't love Arthur, not in that way you see in movies, you know. But I thought love came later, that it was something built with time. And above all, I thought I had no choice. My father had already given his word, and refusing such a marriage would be a shame for the entire family. We got engaged in December 1971 and married in March 1972 in a beautiful ceremony at the Cedar Falls Methodist Church. I was 20, he was 35. I was nervous, but also hopeful. I thought life was going to change for the better. Oh, how wrong I was. Right after the wedding, we went to live in a big house Arthur had in the central area of town. A 2-story house with a front and backyard, iron gate, hardwood furniture, all very fine. But that house, as beautiful as it was, had a heavy air. Arthur's father, old Gerald Miller Fitzgerald, lived with us. He was a man of almost 70, already somewhat sickly, who spent his days in a rocking chair on the porch, smoking cigars and reading the newspaper. He barely spoke to me, just looked at me with those deep-set eyes, as if evaluating me, judging me. 2 weeks after the wedding, old Gerald had a stroke during the night. We woke up to the sound of the maid screaming. When we got to his room, he was already lifeless, mouth open and eyes glazed. Arthur stood there, looking at his father's body, without crying, without showing anything. He just said, "Finally." The funeral was pompous, full of important people from Cedar Falls and the region. Arthur was in black, serious, greeting everyone with that proprietor's air. I was beside him, in a black dress and veil, not quite understanding what was happening. Everything had been so fast, the wedding, my father-in-law's death, that new world where I'd been thrown without an instruction manual. 3 days after the burial, the family lawyer, Mr. Eustace, came to the house for the reading of the will. It was in the dining room, at that huge mahogany table. There were me, Arthur, the lawyer, and 2 more ranch partners. Mr. Eustace opened his leather briefcase, took out some documents, adjusted his glasses on his nose, and began to read in that monotonous voice of someone reading official papers. When he got to the inheritance part, I saw Arthur's face change. He turned red, then white. His hands gripped the chair arms so hard his knuckles turned white. The will said this, I'll never forget the words. I leave all my properties, assets, and values to my son, Arthur Miller Fitzgerald, with the following restrictive clause. The total inheritance will only be released when there is a legitimate heir who guarantees the continuation of the family name. Until this heir is born and registered, my son will receive only a monthly allowance of a value stipulated by the managing partners. This decision aims to ensure that the wealth built by generations is not wasted, but rather preserved for the future. Arthur exploded. He pounded his fist on the table, shouted that it was absurd, that his father had no right to humiliate him like that he was a grown man and didn't need any damn clause to prove anything. But, Mr. Eustace said calmly that a will is a will, that it had legal validity, and if Arthur wanted to contest it, it would take years in court and wouldn't amount to anything. Your father knew you, Arthur. He did what he thought best. When everyone left, Arthur locked himself in the office. I stayed in the living room, frightened, not knowing what to do. Hours later, he came out. His look was different, cold, calculating. He came to me, grabbed my chin hard, looked me in the eyes and said, "Clara, I need to tell you something about this will. My father was a cruel man. The truth is, he doesn't want grandchildren. The clause says exactly the opposite of what you heard. He forbade children. If we have a baby, I lose everything. We'll be poor on the street. You understand? We can never have children. I was paralyzed. I tried to say that wasn't what the lawyer had read, but Arthur cut me off with a shout. You think you understand wills? You who barely finished elementary school? I studied. I know how to read these things. Are you going to trust me, your husband, or are you going to keep doubting? I lowered my head. I was young, naive, and had been raised to obey my husband. So I believed him. I believed the cruelest lie anyone ever told me, and that's how my personal hell began. The months following that conversation were the loneliest of my life. Arthur completely changed with me. He who had been attentive, gallant, became a cold and distant man. He spent his days locked in the office, doing accounts, meeting with partners, managing what remained of his father's empire. And I stayed in that huge house with only the maid, Mrs. Olson, to keep me company. He started isolating me from everyone. When my mother came to visit, he'd make up excuses, that I wasn't feeling well, that we had an appointment, that it was better to leave it for another day. Gradually, visits became rare. My father had died of a heart attack just 2 months after my wedding, and my mother, widowed and tired, no longer had the strength to insist. My siblings lived their lives, and I became increasingly alone in that mansion that felt like a gilded prison. Arthur also wouldn't let me go out alone. A rich man's wife is a target for gossip, Clara. You're not going to parade around town alone like just anyone, he'd say. So I stayed there, within 4 walls, embroidering, reading old magazines I found in the library, talking with Mrs. Olson while she cleaned the house. It was an empty life, without purpose, without love. And the worst of all was the constant pressure. Every time we went to some social event, a dinner with partners, Sunday mass, a party of some acquaintance, people would ask, "So, Arthur, when's the heir coming? Aren't you and Clara going to give old Gerald a grandchild?" And Arthur would smile that yellow smile and say, "Ah, these things come in God's time." But when we got home, he'd take it out on me. Did you see the humiliation? Everyone demanding a child, and here I am stuck because of a cursed will that prohibits me from having what every normal family has. I tried to comfort him, but he'd push me away rudely. And deep down, I also suffered, because I wanted to be a mother. I saw my childhood friends pushing baby strollers down the street, with that tired but also fulfilled look, and I felt a huge emptiness in my chest. But I thought that was the price to pay for having comfort, for not going through hardship. That's what I repeated to myself every night before sleeping. At least you're not hungry, Clara. At least you have a roof and food on the table. It was in August 1972, about 5 months after the wedding, that Arthur came home with news. He called me to the living room, told me to sit down, and said in that controlled voice of his, "Clara, I've made an appointment for you with a doctor. Dr. Sawyer, a gynecologist friend of mine. You've been going to the bathroom a lot lately, complaining of pain. I think it might be some problem with your ovaries, maybe a cyst. We're going to do some tests." I hadn't even complained of any pain, but when I tried to say that, he cut me off. "Don't be stubborn, Clara. I noticed. And I want you to be healthy. After all, even though we can't have children, I need a healthy wife by my side." I agreed because I'd never been to a gynecologist before and thought maybe it was indeed good to do some tests. The appointment was at a private clinic in a nice building downtown. Dr. Sawyer was a middle-aged man with glasses and impeccable white coat who examined me and ordered some blood and urine tests. Arthur stayed in the room the whole time, supervising everything, as if I were a child incapable of speaking for myself. A week later, we went back there to get the results. Doctor. Sawyer called Arthur into his private office, and they stayed in there for almost half an hour while I waited in the outer room. When they came out, Arthur had a serious expression. "It's as I imagined, Clara. You have a cyst on your ovary. You'll need surgery." Surgery? I felt a chill run down my spine. "But, is it serious? Is it dangerous?" I asked. my voice trembling. Arthur put his hand on my shoulder, but his touch had no affection. "It's simple, Clara. The doctor will remove the cyst, and you'll be fine. Everything's already scheduled for next week. You'll check in the morning, have the surgery, and the next day you'll be back home." I had no one to ask, no one to advise me. Mrs. Olson, when she found out, was worried. "Oh, my dear, surgery is serious business. Are you sure you need it?" she asked while packing my little suitcase. But what could I do? My husband and the doctor had decided, and I had no knowledge to question. On the morning of the surgery, Arthur took me to the clinic very early. The sky was gray, cold, with that fine Iowa winter drizzle that soaks to the bone. The clinic was empty, silent, smelling of disinfectant and ether. A nurse took me to a little room, told me to put on that hospital gown, that thin cloth that leaves you exposed and vulnerable. I was shaking, from cold, from fear, from an anguish I didn't know where it came from. They laid me on a gurney, put an IV in my arm. The nurse applied something to the vein and said, "This is just to help you relax a little before anesthesia." I felt dizzy, a weakness taking over my body. Everything got kind of slow, kind of blurry. Arthur was there, standing beside the gurney, looking at me. And it was at that moment, when I was already too weak to react, that he leaned down very close to my ear. What he said at that moment, I'll never forget. I won't repeat the exact words because they still hurt me, but the meaning was clear. He had lied. There was no cyst. He had paid Dr. Sawyer to do something terrible to me, to ensure I could never give him what the will required. He said he wasn't going to share the inheritance with anyone, that he had plans to forge documents later, and that I was just an obstacle that needed to be neutralized. He whispered all of that in that cold voice while I tried to scream, tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, helpless, at his mercy. Arthur left the room with a smile at the corner of his mouth. I heard the door close. I tried to call the nurse, but my voice came out weak, almost inaudible. Tears ran down the corners of my eyes, wetting the pillow. I was trapped there, waiting for a man in a white coat to do something irreversible to me, something that would kill my dream of being a mother, that would transform me forever. That's when Dr. Sawyer came in. He came straight to the gurney, checked the equipment, vital signs, blood pressure. I looked at him with desperation, with pleading in my eyes. He saw it. I know he saw it because he stopped, looked back at me, and I saw something pass across his face. A conflict, a doubt, maybe even remorse. He stood there for seconds that seemed like hours. Then he approached, as if to adjust the oxygen mask on my face. But instead, he did something I didn't expect. He slipped something small and folded into my closed hand, squeezed my fingers around it, and whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear. "Read later. Trust me." Before I could process what had happened, he put the mask on my face, and the anesthesia gas began pulling me into a deep, dark sleep. The last thing I remember thinking was, "God, if you exist, help me." And then everything went black. I woke up in a white room, with that cold hospital light hitting my eyes. My mouth was dry, my throat scratchy as if I'd swallowed sand, and there was a dull pain in my lower abdomen, as if someone had been inside with cold, metal instruments. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was, what had happened. Everything was foggy, confused, like when you wake up from a nightmare and don't quite know what was real and what was a dream. But then memory came back, clear and cruel as a punch to the stomach. Arthur whispering those words in my ear while I was paralyzed on the gurney. My total helplessness, my body weak from sedatives, my voice that wouldn't come out, my arms that wouldn't move. The silent desperation of someone being taken to slaughter and can't do anything to save themselves. I felt nausea rising in my throat, a desire to vomit that was both physical and emotional, my body rejecting the horror of what had happened. I tried to move, but my body was heavy, sluggish, as if it had lead in the veins instead of blood. The anesthesia still hadn't completely worn off. There was a bandage on my belly, covered with that rough hospital fabric that itched the skin. I looked around slowly, turning my head carefully, because even that hurt. The room was empty, no nurse, no doctor, and no Arthur, thank God. I was alone with my despair, and with a terrible certainty hammering in my head like a church bell announcing a funeral. He had done it. He had cut me up inside. He had destroyed my ability to be a mother. I would never again be able to carry a life inside me, to feel a baby moving in my belly, to breastfeed, to rock a child in my arms. All of that had been torn from me by force, without my consent, by a man who should have loved and protected me. The tears came without control, wetting the pillow, running down my neck, entering the corners of my mouth with that salty taste of pure desperation. I cried quietly, stifling sobs, afraid someone would hear, afraid of seeming weak, but also because there was no one there to comfort me anyway. I didn't have my mother nearby. She was far away, old, tired, and didn't even really know what I was going through. I didn't have siblings. They had their own lives and barely remembered me since I'd gotten married. I didn't have friends. Arthur had cut all my ties with the world. I was completely alone in that universe, at the mercy of a man who didn't love me, who saw me only as an obstacle, as a thing that needed to be controlled, dominated, and finally destroyed. I looked at the white ceiling, at the simple lamp hanging there, and thought, is it worth continuing? Wouldn't it be better to let everything end here? But something inside me, a stubborn spark, a strength I didn't even know I had, said no. It won't be like this. It won't end like this. I won't let him win. That's when I felt something strange in my right hand. A slight discomfort, a weird sensation, as if there was something folded between my fingers, stuck by perspiration. I frowned, confused. What was that? I opened my hand slowly, with difficulty because my fingers were stiff, and saw a tiny piece of crumpled paper, somewhat damp from the sweat that had run through my palm during surgery. The note. My heart leaped in my chest. The doctor had put a note in my hand before anesthesia. I had completely forgotten, but now the memory came back like a flash. Him approaching, adjusting the oxygen mask, sliding that folded paper into my closed hand, whispering, "Trust me." But trust in what? What had he written there? With trembling fingers so much I could barely hold the paper, I unfolded that tiny piece with all care, as if it were something sacred. The handwriting was hurried, somewhat crooked, written in pencil almost illegibly. I didn't do the tubal ligation. I only made a superficial cut in the skin to leave a scar. And I have news. The pre-operative tests showed you're already pregnant, 3 weeks along. Protect this child. Arthur can't know. S. I read once, read twice, read 3 times, blinking to make sure I was reading right, that it wasn't a hallucination from anesthesia, that those words were really written there. Pregnant? I was pregnant? But how? When had it happened? And Dr. Sawyer. He hadn't really cut me. He had only pretended. He had risked everything, his friendship with Arthur, maybe even his medical license, to spare me. My mind went into a whirlwind of emotions so intense, so contradictory, that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My whole body shook in the bed. Tears still fell, but now they were different tears. Of relief, shock, gratitude, terror, hope, all mixed into one thing. I put my hand over my belly, over the bandage covering that superficial cut that meant nothing, and felt something I had never felt before in my life. A deep, instantaneous, visceral connection with that tiny little life growing inside me without me knowing. My son, or my daughter, my baby, the heir Arthur so feared, the grandchild the will required, the child who would change everything, turn everything upside down, destroy all that man's cruel plans. But along with the explosive joy that made my chest seem too small to contain everything I was feeling, came ice-cold terror. Arthur thought I was sterile now. Arthur thought he had won, that he had eliminated the problem, that he had guaranteed total control of the situation. If he found out I was pregnant, what would he do to me? Would he try to force me to get rid of the baby? Would he push me down the stairs? Would he put poison in my food? Or worse, would he try to make me disappear completely, pretend it was an accident, bury me somewhere, and tell everyone I had run away? I knew what he was capable of. A man who pays a doctor to mutilate his own wife is capable of anything. I squeezed the note in my hand, crumpling it into a tiny ball, the size of a pea. I couldn't leave a trace. I couldn't let Arthur find that paper. If he discovered the doctor had betrayed him, or rather, had saved me, he might go after Dr. Sawyer too. And I couldn't put at risk the life of the only man who had the courage to help me. When the nurse came into the room about 10 minutes later, I had already shoved that paper ball under my body, hidden between the sheet and mattress. And when she asked, with that mechanically cheerful voice of someone repeating the same phrase 50 times a day, "How are you feeling, Mrs. Clara?" I said with a weak but controlled voice, "I'm fine, just tired. I just want to go home and rest." Arthur showed up late in the afternoon, when the sun was already setting outside, and the room was getting orange with the light coming through the window. He entered with a bouquet of red roses. What cruel irony, what disgusting hypocrisy, and that satisfied smile of someone who had just won an important battle. "How's my wife?" he asked, kissing my forehead coldly, with that dry kiss that had no affection, no human warmth. I had to make a superhuman effort not to turn my face away from him in disgust, not to spit in his face, not to scream all the truth stuck in my throat. But I controlled myself, because now I had a trump card. Now I had a secret. Now I had power, even if he didn't know it. "I'm fine," I lied, looking at him with that sacrificial lamb face he expected to see. "The doctor said everything went well. He removed the cyst and did what needed to be done." "Great," Arthur replied, sitting in the chair next to the bed and crossing his legs with that relaxed pose of someone who doesn't have a worry in the world. "Now you can recover in peace. And we can go on with our lives without worries." He said, "without worries," with so much relief in his voice, with so much poorly disguised pleasure, that I felt hatred. True hatred, deep, visceral, the kind that burns inside and leaves a taste of bile in the mouth. But I smiled. I smiled and said, "Yes, finally we can live in peace." And inside, I thought, "You have no idea what's coming, Arthur. You have no clue." We went home the next day. I faked weakness, faked pain, faked being devastated for having lost my fertility. I cried false tears when Mrs. Olson hugged me and said, "Oh, my dear, what a sadness. But God knows what he does." Arthur treated me with that fake, mechanical kindness of someone caring for a sick pet. He had Mrs. Olson make chicken broths, herbal teas, bring me extra pillows. But he didn't sleep with me that night, nor the following nights. He slept in the guest room, so as not to disturb me during recovery, he said. But I knew the truth. He was no longer interested in me. I had fulfilled my role, or rather, had been neutralized. Now I was just a decoration in his house, a decorative wife he kept for social appearances. And it was there, on those nights alone, lying in that huge, cold bed, with my hand over the belly that still showed no sign but held the biggest secret of my life, that I began making plans. Secret, silent, strategic plans that I couldn't share with anyone. I needed to protect my baby. I needed to buy time. I needed to make Arthur believe he had won, while I, inside, prepared my revenge. A just, deserved revenge that would come at the right time. In the following weeks, I was the best actress that ever existed. I faked deep sadness when someone mentioned babies in conversations. I faked that I had accepted my cruel fate of never being a mother. I faked being at peace with everything, that I was conforming, that I was learning to live with that loss. But inside, I was at war. A silent, calculated, strategic war, where every move had to be thought out with millimeter precision. I knew I had a few months' advantage, The belly would only start showing around the 4th, 5th month of pregnancy. Until then, I could hide with loose clothes, shawls, tight girdles when necessary, with excuses about having gained a little weight recovering from surgery. But I needed a bigger, more solid plan. I needed outside help. I needed someone who could protect me when the truth finally came out and hell broke loose. That's when I remembered the lawyer. Mr. Eustace, that serious man with glasses and a gray suit who had read the will months ago. He knew the truth. He knew the clause was exactly the opposite of what Arthur had told me. He knew an heir was necessary, not forbidden. Would he help me? Did he have any legal power to protect me? Or was he loyal to Arthur and would turn me in? I started making secret calls. When Arthur went out to the ranches to supervise the cattle or to meetings with partners to discuss business, I used the heavy black telephone in the living room and called Mr. Eustace's office downtown. My heart beat so hard I thought it would come out of my mouth. The first 3 times, I only managed to speak with his secretary, a woman with a formal voice who said the gentleman was busy. But I insisted, called again and again. Said it was urgent, that it was about the will of the deceased Gerald Miller Fitzgerald, that it was a delicate matter that could only be discussed with him personally. And finally, on a rainy September morning, when the cold wind beat against the windows and Cedar Falls was gray and melancholic, Mr. Eustace answered the phone personally. "Mrs. Clara?" he said, with that deep, careful voice of an experienced lawyer who knows every word can have consequences. "How can I help you? My secretary said it's urgent." I took a deep breath. I looked at the living room door, checking if Mrs. Olson was far away in the kitchen, if Arthur hadn't returned by surprise. I listened to the sound of rain outside, the tick-tock of the wall clock, the heavy silence of the house. And then I said, in a low but firm voice, each word heavy with meaning, "Sir, I need to know the truth about the will. Arthur told me the clause prohibited children. That if we had a baby, he'd lose everything and we'd be poor. But that's not it, is it? I heard you read that day, the inheritance only comes with an heir, not without. Am I right or am I crazy?" There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line, a long, thoughtful silence that made me nervous. Had I made a mistake? Was he going to report me to Arthur? But then Mr. Eustace's voice came, slow and careful. "Mrs. Clara, you are absolutely correct. The clause requires a legitimate heir, a grandchild, for the full release of the inheritance. Without an heir, Arthur receives only the stipulated allowance. Why did Arthur tell you the opposite? That makes no sense whatsoever." I couldn't answer properly. My voice failed, got stuck in my throat, along with a sob I was trying to swallow. Tears came back, wetting my face. But the lawyer was smart and experienced. He understood that something very wrong was happening in that house. "Mrs. Clara," he said slowly, with genuine concern in his voice. "Are you in danger? Do you need immediate help? Do you want me to come there?" "Not yet," I replied, wiping tears with the back of my hand, trying to regain control. "Not yet, sir, but I'll need help soon. Very soon. And when I need it, will you be on my side?" "Mrs. Clara," he said firmly, "truth is truth. Law is law. And I serve both. When you need me, I'll be here." And so, with that promise kept in my heart, like a protective talisman, I planted the first seed of my liberation. The following months were the most difficult and at the same time, the most strategic of my life. I lived a constant lie, but it was a necessary lie to survive. During the day, I was the sad and resigned wife Arthur wanted me to be. At night, alone in the room, I talked quietly with my baby, ran my hand over the growing belly, and made promises. "I'll protect you. No matter what happens, you'll be born and have everything that's rightfully yours." Hiding the pregnancy was a challenge that required all my creativity. In the 3rd month, when the belly was still almost imperceptible, I started wearing looser dresses, loose blouses over skirts. I told Arthur and Mrs. Olson I had gained a little weight recovering from surgery, that the doctor said it was normal because of hormones. In the 4th month, I had to be more careful. I bought some girdles at a discreet store in another town, far from Cedar Falls, where no one knew me. I wore those tight girdles under my clothes, and over them, large shawls, heavy coats, even when it wasn't that cold. I made up that I had constant chills, that I couldn't warm up properly. Arthur barely paid attention to me anyway. He was increasingly obsessed with the inheritance money, with that allowance he found humiliating, with plans to somehow circumvent the will. He spent hours locked in the office with partners, doing accounts, discussing strategies. Sometimes I heard their conversations through the door. They talked about forging certificates, bribing registry officials, creating a fictitious heir on paper. Anything but accept that Arthur would have to have a real child. Meanwhile, I secretly met with Mr. Eustace. They were careful, planned meetings. I'd pretend I was going to church or visiting my mother, and actually go to his office downtown. He was an upright man, that lawyer. When I told him the whole truth, Arthur's lie about the will, the forced surgery that didn't really happen, the secret pregnancy, he was shocked. But he didn't judge me. On the contrary, he said, "Mrs. Clara, this man committed serious crimes, coercion, attempted bodily harm, fraud, and when you reveal you're pregnant, he'll lose any and all rights to the inheritance." Together, we planned every detail. Doctor Sawyer, that doctor who had saved me, provided all the reports, the pre-operative tests showing my pregnancy, the surgical report where he described what he really did, just a superficial cut. Everything documented and signed. He risked his own career for me, and I'll never forget that. Mr. Eustace kept these documents secret, waiting for the right moment. "When you reveal it, Mrs. Clara," he advised me one December afternoon while we had tea in his office, "it needs to be in public. There need to be important witnesses, people who can't be bought or intimidated by Arthur. That's the only way you'll be protected." We waited for the perfect opportunity. And it came in January 1973, when I was 5 months pregnant. Arthur organized a dinner at our house, a pompous dinner, with the 3 main ranch partners, 2 lawyers he had hired to resolve the inheritance issue, and even the county judge, Judge Walden, an important man Arthur wanted to impress. The dinner's objective was to present a plan to release the money without fulfilling the will's clause. Arthur was confident, thinking he was going to fool everyone. I spent the day preparing everything with Mrs. Olson. The table was set with fine china, silver cutlery, crystal glasses. The food was elaborate: roasted chicken, wild rice, salads, stuffing, imported wine. I was nervous, but didn't let it show. That was my night. That was the moment of truth. When the guests arrived, around 7 at night, I stayed in the room getting ready. Mr. Eustace had arrived too. Arthur didn't even know I had invited his father's lawyer, but I said it was protocol, that he needed to be present in any discussion about the inheritance. Arthur didn't like it, but couldn't refuse in front of everyone. I let them have dinner first. I stayed listening from upstairs, the conversations, the laughter, Arthur with that fake host voice, offering more wine, telling jokes, charming everyone. After dessert, when they went to the living room to smoke cigars and drink cognac, Arthur began presenting his plan. I heard fragments, him talking about adopting a child and registering as if it were a biological child, bribing doctors to make false documents, finding legal loopholes in the will. That's when I came down the stairs. I had changed in the room, took off the tight girdle I'd been wearing for months, took off the loose clothes, the shawls, all the artifices, put on a dress I had bought in secret, a dress of fine fabric, dark green, fitted to the body, hugging every curve, every volume. And the belly. Oh, the 5-month belly, round, unmistakable, was there exposed for everyone to see. I went down step by step, slowly, holding the handrail. My heart beat so hard I thought I'd faint, but I breathed deeply and continued. When I reached the living room door, everyone was turned forward, listening to Arthur speak. I cleared my throat softly. One of the partners saw me first, and his eyes widened. Then another. Then the judge. Everyone fell silent, looking at me, more specifically at my belly, with that expression of someone who can't believe what they're seeing. Arthur turned his head slowly. When he saw me, the cognac glass he was holding slipped from his fingers and fell on the carpet, spilling that amber liquid. His face went white, completely colorless, as if he'd seen a ghost. He got up staggering from the armchair, pointing at me with a trembling finger, and shouted with a strangled voice, That's impossible! You're sterilized! You can't be pregnant! I paid the doctor to cut you!" Absolute silence in the room. Everyone looked at him, shocked. The judge also stood up, frowning. "What did you just say, Arthur?" Arthur realized his mistake too late. He had given himself away, had confessed in front of important witnesses, a judge, 3 respected businessmen, 2 lawyers. He tried to backtrack, stammering, "No, that's not what I meant. I meant to say..." But I didn't let him. I entered the room with my head held high, with all the dignity that had been crushed during those months. "He said exactly what you heard." My voice came out firm, clear. "Arthur told me his father's will prohibited children, that if I got pregnant he'd lose everything. It was a lie. He took me to a clinic last August saying I had a cyst, but actually he'd paid the doctor to do surgery that would make me sterile. He wanted to ensure I could never give him the heir the will requires." Mr. Eustace stood up, took the leather briefcase he had brought, and pulled out the documents we had prepared. "Gentlemen," he said with that lawyer's voice that doesn't accept contestation, "I have here all the medical reports. The preoperative tests showing Mrs. Clara was already 3 weeks pregnant when taken to surgery. Dr. Sawyer's report describing that for ethical reasons he refused to do the procedure Arthur demanded and only made a superficial cut to simulate surgery. And I have the doctor's own statement, notarized, confessing everything." He distributed copies of the documents to the lawyers and judge. Arthur was paralyzed, watching his whole world crumble. The judge read the papers carefully, with that serious face of someone processing something grave. Then he looked at Arthur with contempt. "Mr. Miller Fitzgerald, what you did constitutes crimes of coercion and attempted serious bodily harm. And as for the inheritance..." Mr. Eustace completed. "Gerald Miller Fitzgerald's will is very clear. There's a secondary clause that establishes, in case of moral incapacity, bad faith or crime committed by the heir Arthur against the gestation or birth of a legitimate heir, legal guardianship of the fortune shall pass entirely to the child's mother until the child reaches adulthood. That is, due to the crimes Arthur committed trying to prevent the birth of his own child, he lost any and all rights to the inheritance. Mrs. Clara is now the legal administrator of the entire fortune on behalf of the baby she carries." It was as if a bomb had exploded in that room. The partners all started talking at once. The judge said he'd open an inquiry. Arthur's lawyers tried to argue, but there was no possible argument. The crime had been confessed in front of witnesses. The documents were legal and incontestable. Arthur looked at me with such deep hatred I felt a chill. "You bitch," he hissed through his teeth. "You tricked me. You set all this up." "No, Arthur," I replied, putting my protective hand over my belly. "You set it up against me. I just survived, and my son will have everything that's rightfully his, everything you tried to steal." That same night, by order of the judge and accompanied by the partners who wanted to protect the ranch's assets, Arthur was expelled from the house. He left with only the clothes on his back and the allowance he'd continue receiving, that same allowance he so despised. The mansion, the ranches, the money, everything passed to my legal administration. And I, who had been treated as nothing, as a disposable object, became the richest woman in Cedar Falls overnight. But more important than the money, I had become free. My son was born in June 1973 on a sunny Iowa autumn day. I named him Philip in honor of no one in particular. I just wanted him to have a nice name, a name that was his alone, without carrying the weight of any past story. When I held that little baby in my arms for the first time, with those dark little eyes looking at me with absolute trust, I swore to myself, this boy will grow up knowing he's loved. He'll never feel what I felt. And I kept that promise. I raised my Philip with all the love in the world. He never lacked anything. Good food, clean clothes, private school, music teachers, English teachers, everything he needed to have a good and dignified life. But more important than that, I gave him what no money can buy: presence, affection, attention. I was there at every school party, every football game, every important moment. And when he asked questions about his father, I told the truth in a way a child could understand. Your father didn't know how to be a father, my son. But you have a mother who loves you for two. Arthur never set foot in our house again. He continued receiving the Will's allowance. It was enough for him to live modestly, but nothing compared to the fortune he had lost. I heard he went to live in Des Moines, that he tried some businesses that didn't work out, that he became bitter and lonely. In 1989, he died of a heart attack, alone in a rented apartment. When I received the news, I felt neither joy nor sadness. Just emptiness, a realization that that man had wasted his whole life chasing money and died without having anything that really mattered. I managed the fortune responsibly. The ranches continued producing, the businesses prospered under the management of the honest partners my father-in-law had chosen. I signed the necessary papers, participated in important meetings, but always with Mr. Eustace by my side guiding me. When Philip turned 18 in 1991, he legally inherited everything, as the will determined. But he, whom I had raised with good values, consulted me on everything. Mom, he'd say, you fought for this. You deserve to decide. Together, we decided to do something good with that money. We sold one of the ranches and used the money to build a public school in Cedar Falls, a beautiful school where poor children could study with dignity. We donated to hospitals, nursing homes, institutions that cared for women in vulnerable situations. We didn't do it to show off. We did it because it was right, because I knew what it was like to need help and not have it. Philip grew up, graduated in agricultural studies, married a good woman named Lucy, and gave me 3 wonderful grandchildren who are the light of my life. He lives nearby, in a house he built about 10 minutes from mine, and takes care of the remaining lands from the inheritance with competence and love for the land. He's a good, hard-working, honest man. Everything his father wasn't. And I, after so many years managing fortunes and solving complicated issues, decided to simplify my life. When I turned 70, I passed all legal responsibilities to Philip and retired for real. Today, at 73, I live here in this simple little house in Cedar Falls, the town where I was born and where I intend to die. It's not the mansion where I lived with Arthur. I sold that a long time ago, couldn't bear the memories of those walls. It's a small, cozy house with a huge garden that's my passion and my therapy. I wake up early every day, make my coffee with milk, eat a piece of cornbread or pound cake, and go to the garden. It's there, working the soil, watering the flowers, talking to the plants, that I find my peace. Each rose that blooms is a small victory. Each seed that germinates is a reminder that life always finds a way to continue, even after the most terrible storms. My grandchildren come visit almost every weekend. They're between 8 and 15 years old and love coming here to eat my cake, play in the garden, hear my stories. Not all of them, of course. Some stories are too heavy for young ears. But I tell them about my childhood, about old times in Cedar Falls, about how life was different. And they hug me and say, "Grandma, you're the best in the world." My life today is simple, but it's full. I have my church friends with whom I have coffee on Sunday afternoons. I have my son who calls me every day to see if I'm well. I have my daughter-in-law who brings me meals when she knows I'm too tired to cook. I have my grandchildren who fill my house with noise and joy. I have my garden, my books, my memories, the good and the bad, because the bad ones also taught me who I am. When I look back, to my 20 years old when that nightmare began, I barely recognize that scared and naive girl I was. Today's Clara is strong, wise, free. I survived the worst that one human being can do to another, and not only survived, I won. I transformed pain into fight, and fight into victory. And from that victory was born a good life, a loving family, a legacy of dignity. I have no resentment in my heart. Arthur paid his price while still alive, becoming bitter in loneliness for everything he planted with his own wickedness. I, on the other hand, still harvest today the fruits of love, courage, and faith that never completely abandoned me, even in the darkest moments. And that's how, my dear ones, surrounded by flowers and love, I live my days here in Cedar Falls, on the same land where I was born, grateful for each dawn, for each hug, for each small joy that life still has in store for me. My dear ones, if you're listening now and going through something similar, if someone is controlling you, manipulating you, making you believe lies to keep you trapped in a situation of suffering, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And as impossible as it may seem at this moment, there's a way out. There's always a way out. I learned some things in these more than 50 years since I lived that nightmare. The first thing I learned is that when a man or a woman or any person tries to take from you control over your own body, over your own choices, that person doesn't love you, they possess you. And being possessed isn't love, it's prison. True love respects, honors, protects. True love doesn't lie, doesn't manipulate, doesn't hurt. The second thing I learned is that truth always wins in the end. It may take time, it may hurt, it may seem like lies are stronger, but they're not. Truth has its own strength, a light that can't be extinguished by any darkness. When I came down those stairs with my belly showing, I was carrying the living truth inside me, and that truth destroyed all the lies Arthur had built. The third thing is that you're stronger than you imagine. I was a 20-year-old girl, without education, without resources, without anyone to defend me. But when necessary, I found strength where I didn't even know it existed. I learned to plan, to wait for the right moment, to be strategic. And you also have that strength inside you, even if you can't see it yet. If you're being controlled, manipulated, threatened, seek help. Talk to someone you trust. It could be a family member, a friend, a religious leader, a healthcare professional, your country's authorities. In every place in the world, there are people and organizations ready to help those in vulnerable situations. Don't be ashamed, don't be afraid. The shame isn't yours, it belongs to whoever hurts you. Fear can be overcome when you're no longer alone. And if you know someone going through this, be the help that person needs. Be the doctor. Sawyer, who had the courage to do what's right, even at risk. Be the Mr. Eustace who chose justice instead of loyalty to money. Be the Mrs. Olson who, even being just a maid, treated me with affection when I most needed it. Small acts of kindness can save lives. I transformed the poison they gave me into medicine. I transformed pain into strength. I transformed the attempt to destroy me into a reason to fight. And today, when I look at my blooming garden, when I hug my grandchildren, when I see my son being the honorable man his father never was, I know I won. And you can win too. Life always finds a way to flourish, even in the most arid soil. You are that life. You are that flower that will bloom despite everything. Thank you for listening to me until now, for giving me this space to tell my story. Each one of you on the other side, listening to me, is part of my healing. Because speaking, sharing, is a way of freeing what was trapped inside the chest for so long. And now, my dear ones, my precious ones, I need to make a very important request. If this story touched your heart, if you believe it needs to be heard by more people, especially by those women and men who are trapped in similar situations, I ask you, from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. Because each subscription is a way to make stories like mine reach those who need to hear them. It's a way of saying, I care, I believe in the power of truth, I want to be part of this chain of hope. And leave here in the comments just one word that summarizes what you felt hearing this story. It could be courage, it could be justice, it could be hope, it could be freedom. I'll read each comment, each word, and I'll know my story wasn't in vain. Do it now, don't wait another minute, because while you're here, there might be someone suffering and needing to hear that it's possible to win. May God bless each one of you. May you find strength in your battles, and may you never, ever give up on flourishing.